right. We are going to embark on a series of videos that investigate existentialism, and I'm going to present very accepted, commonly well-known aspects of existential thought. I will go into that, and I'll spend time, and we can pull apart the fabric of those ideas, like being thrown and things like that. But I would like to, just for today, introduce existentialism in a way that I know is unique, because nobody else has ever brought it up in a conversation besides myself. I spent time with more than a score of people entirely dedicated to consciousness, people who are, trying to get beyond the lonely existential life, trying to become enlightened, fulfilled, liberated, moksha, all those things that you want to apply to a higher state of consciousness where you're not suffering as you are in this roiling, boiling ocean of trouble, okay? I mean, life is struggle. Anybody who doesn't acknowledge that is just living with his or her head in a dark place where the sun doesn't shine. So existentialism is not even just a philosophy. I had to deal with that question when I gave a talk on existentialism at the community college, where I was submarined by two boys who were totalitarian personalities dedicated to their Baptist minister daddy figure. And the totalitarianism was so bad that one of them said existentialism should not even be allowed to be taught in the colleges. Shades of Hitler, shades of burning the books.
So
this is such a profound contradiction. First of all, to say that in philosophy, where philosophy is all about the enterprise of ideas.
they were saying that it's because it undermines the idea of authoritarianism.
It undermines their sense of rightness, their sense of security, their sense of being on the side of God. They were childish nitwits. One of them changed. A year later, he apologized to me. But the other one continued to be a moron in various senses. And they were considered to be the star pupils of this professor's class. He was a smart guy with a PhD, but he's a Baptist minister. And so he, like everybody else with that kind of background, will say that there is no morality without God. You can't be a moral being without God. Oh, wow, that leaves out a lot of people. Because their idea is always, their approach is always that you've got to be bending a knee to some great daddy figure.
In order to know the difference between good and bad.
To me, their version of God is an insult to God.
It's a limitation,
It's
limited version.
Certainly limited.
Right.
And then what they do is they look at the crime and the punishment. They look at, I'm being good, save me, because there's fear behind authoritarianism. We know it's constituted of narcissism and paranoia.
So you're constantly, as a person that's experiencing that level of narcissistic, authoritarian approach to life, you're looking over your shoulder, waiting to get scorned for your misdeeds.
Some of them would be, sure. I mean, they're extremely defensive, but I wouldn't even put it on that.
But that's their compass.
When they get into their enclave, they are the authority, they are the strength, and they will burn you at the stake. They were called the Inquisitors in the Inquisition. These are the people who hated women so much because women tempted them away from some kind of high relationship to God in the flesh. Oh, the flesh is ugly and dirty and lowly, and they did live in filth back in the Middle Ages. And so they used to go into a village and they find the most beautiful of the women. Of course, she has to be tortured beyond recognition. And maybe if she's allowed to live, they set her loose, and then she's not accepted anymore by the villagers, and so she goes into the forest where in most cases she'll go die, but in some cases she'll actually live and learn things about botanicals, and she'll become the witch that you go to for the potion to give you the horniness for your boyfriend or your girlfriend or whatever, or the abortion, or she'll be the woman who knows, because she had to learn. She survived that way. So what I'm really talking about is I'm really disgusted with this attitude about anti-existential. The fact is, let's throw out the existential philosophy. Let's talk about the fact that we are all existential beings. We are all individualized beings in relationship to a world that is limited and full of barbed wire for us. And anybody who's lived any length of time understands that, sees the terrible cruelty in the world. Some of my friends are very strong animal advocates, and they know what goes on. Poor animals. They are not all treated like this by any stretch. So what I would focus on at the beginning of this is for people to understand what it means to be existential, and it means to be what you are, not only who you are in your relationship to other people. That's part of your existential experience. What you are in relationship to your world, what you are in relationship to yourself. How close can you get to yourself? Many people can't. They have to look away, and they'll openly say it. I hate to do this. I hate to do philosophy. I'm not going to look at myself. I might see something I don't like.
Right. The self-idealization.
The self-idealization might start to crack.
Right.
And so existential thought, existential experience is with the self, always. And you'll hear the word thrown around in movies and places. People will simply apply it, and they'll apply it correctly because it's a catch-all term that makes reference to your embodied experience, your existential moment right now. This is an existential, you cannot, you can't escape it. And the existential thought has been with us from the beginning of literature. You find it everywhere. And so there's so much on it. There are formal philosophers, there are psychologists, there are playwrights, there are novelists. Dostoevsky, before anybody even used the word existentialism, because it really got started in the 40s in Paris when the Germans occupied France. But before then, Dostoevsky, the great novelist, was teaching existential experiences through his spectacular psychological novels. If you ever read Dostoevsky, you'd say, I have trouble putting the book down. He's that spectacular. Considered to be the greatest in the eyes of many people. Anyway, his characters, they run the gamut of existential experiences, all kinds of, and they teach you. And anybody says, oh, I hate existentialism. Well, you hate this life. You hate understanding anything. Existentialism is simply an understanding of your immediate human condition.
Well, I think it's the act of analyzing and questioning the self that is what people hate, and they're throwing existentialism as a label upon that, but they're trying to relinquish the responsibility that they have to overcome their flaws.
There's a book written by Erich Fromm, great psychological not novelist, but a teacher. He's a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a philosopher, a Marxist. At least his critique of capitalism is Marxist. And he did some excellent evaluations of historical periods. And the book I would recommend to everybody is called Escape from Freedom by Erich Fromm. It's like taking a course. It's a wonderful book, outstanding scholarship. And he talks about the various expressions of the escape from freedom. You see it under all kinds of different circumstances. You can see it in post-World War I Germany, where people had lost their sense of identity, and thus they were dressing like, women were dressing like men in the cabarets, and the cabarets were characterized by excessive amounts of beer drinking and false laughter. Laughing too hard. And then they found Hitler, gave him a sense of purpose. I mean, I hope nobody thinks that like doing existentialism is going to make you rise above all this. It could.
Well, what would be
if you become really sincere about the honesty that's required to do this work, but it doesn't have to be analysis. It simply has to be being the witness. And that's what I would get to in a moment.
The benefit, I guess the benefit of doing this practice, of learning this material, and the detriment to not knowing this material. Maybe you can go into that to give like what.
Just briefly.
Yeah.
Sure. The benefit is possibly being able to change the course of your vehicle that you are as you fly through space. Maybe it changes a decision, huh? Because we define ourselves by our decisions, according to the existentialists. That's who we are, not by our sentiments and our thoughts. But that's why Eric Fromm also wrote a book called The Art of Love, or Loving, and in it he says that love is also a commitment. It's a commitment. It's something that you have to continue to do, because you're going to run into existential experiences like familiarity and boredom and antagonism. There's so much good literature written on it by some really good people like Abraham Maslow, where he talks about, the woman, how sometimes she's beautiful like a goddess and other times she stinks, and you've got to deal with that. And you can read about that forever, but until you experience living with another person where women are so disgusted with men, and rightfully so, probably, right? And then men lose their vision, which must come out of their childhood, of this perfect being who's going to give them pleasure and solace all the time. Wait a minute, no, she's not your mother. She's a mannequin wrapped in barbed wire. Sorry, but that's an existential analogy. I'm sorry, I'm just joking.
And then the detriment to not understanding this stuff would be
The
shadow work,
I'm
essentially,
sorry.
right?
The detriment would be you're going to always, yes, you're right, shadow is going to emerge, because
your negative side, your
the shadow was conceived and expressed by Jung, but it's been there. I mean, Jung said, Jung used to uncover stuff. Freud would think about, but Jung would do great research on all kinds of stuff, and he would dig into the dirt and he'd come up with stuff. And one of them was that the shadow is there. They like to say, you see it on these TV programs, and everybody has a dark side. Of course, what is this, news?
Right.
It is news to some people. They can't conceive of themselves in any other way except the way that they promoted themselves socially. And that's sad, because it's not only false for everybody else, but it's false for oneself. You're not accepting yourself. You don't have to be perfect with someone who's gone through this. Somebody who understands this doesn't need you to be perfect, doesn't want you to try to be, because there's no such thing in this world. Everything has its opposition. Every idea can be opposed in full force, in perfect equilibrium to the strength of that same idea. That's the nature of the dialectic in this world. And you can trace it back to an idea like the Tao. Everything is dark and light. And here we are identifying only with one side usually, unless you're Whitey Bulger, and then his shadow would have been an angel. Okay? I mean, from everything we've learned about him, he was just an evildoer, to use George W. Bush's quote, evildoer.
So you get a better sense of self. You get a better sense of what your own values are by
looking at existentialism, learning about reading the existential writers will. I mean, you don't have to go study existentialism. You can go read Dostoevsky's spectacular novels. You wouldn't probably enjoy reading Kierkegaard unless you're a very serious person. I mean, he died at the age of 42 and he looked like he was 85. So there was a man who was dark and deep and very negative. He had thrown away love because of his own existential dynamic. But in his own writing, he anticipated psychoanalysis. He was doing Freudian stuff, the stuff that a lot of people would accept. There he was, dark and just ready to die, and yet look what came out of him. If you can read him, I mean, there are people, there are people who have the intellect. I don't know how many of them there are in Rhode Island when the colleges get out. But there are serious people, and I personally, I'm not ever going to fault that. Even if it leads nowhere, I'm not going to fault it.
Well, I think different people have different paths to pursuing their education and things, and certainly YouTube opens up a huge opportunity for a lot of people that can't attend based on time or anything else that could get in the way. But as we go through this series, I'm sure we'll end up asking a lot of questions along the way.
I have one question.
Sure.
And we can do something with it, or we can just leave it. Here's a question. Let me make a statement that psychologists agree on. I did finally hear a psychologist or two point this out too, even though I was the first person to talk about it in that group of over 20 people. And the question was this, it's based upon this fact. Thinking. Was ist das thing? Duncan, Heidegger. What is thinking? From my own point of view, let's look at this one simple aspect of thinking. It's internal dialogue. Is it not? Evaluate your thinking. Look at your thinking. You don't have to think about it, just see it as it unrolls. It sounds very much like this, which means what? It implies a listener. That's the key. Dialogue implies a listener. True? Have you ever thought of this?
Mm-hmm.
You have.
Well, only after we discussed it like 20 years ago.
We did. We talked about this?
Yeah.
Oh, so you're already like, you should be doing this. But think about it. There you are, you're talking to somebody. To whom are you speaking? There's the question. There's the existential question. You want to say you're speaking to yourself? What are you doing? Rehearsing a talk? Yes. If you're speaking to yourself, you're rehearsing a talk. Or if you're some crazy person who's taught like for 44 years plus, right? You think thoughts because you're thinking thoughts that you would express in front of a group of prisoners, people who can't escape, who are not smart enough to find their way to the door. So there it is. There's the question. Some people may start to go into that and go more and more deeply. What do you mean you're talking to yourself? What self? Now, I think that some people lie to themselves about stuff.
Some?
Lots of people, right? Okay, all right, you're being a senator. You make me look like Mary Poppins. All right, no. So people lie to themselves, so when they think thoughts, they're actually thinking defenses? Wow. How do you manage to do that? How do you lie to yourself? And yet, I know.
How do you trust yourself?
Oh, interesting. I don't know what that means. How do you trust yourself?
After you lie to yourself, how do you trust yourself?
Yeah, that's right. And some people we know just their whole lives were statements that you can't trust me. No matter what we do, I'm always going to do something for myself first, last, and foremost. Right? Yeah. Yeah, that like didn't matter. Like who is the one that's watching this? It's just so isolated. Isn't there a tremendous amount of fear in there to be in that position where you have to lie to yourself all the time? But if you want to be really authentic about this, then look at that. What is that sees you talking to yourself? Some people would say it's the witness. And some people would say they go beyond the Satori witness, beyond the Zen witness. They take it into a higher space, a higher realm of existence, and they call it Atman. Do you use the word Atman? If somebody asked you to explain Atman, what would you say to them? What do you know of it?
I would think that the word represents the limitless consciousness.
Yeah, that's good, right. Some people would call it the oversoul, I think. They use these terms.
Pre-existing, pre-manifest.
Existing from one lifetime to another.
unmanifested.
It's I've heard the term. I like the zeitgeist, right? Time spirit. But it's also that's like the eyes of God. So it's the witness of God going through all the different lives, because everybody has the Atman. Everything has the Atman. Every consciousness has the Atman. And so it exists throughout all the separate lives as if it were separate. That's quite a feat. I mean, you talk about the impossible. That's called the universal becoming the particular, which is called the logical scandal, which is otherwise known as the incarnation of God, Jesus Christ, in the church, okay? Lots of theology back at PC, back in the Middle Ages when I went there. So anyway, here you go. Here's your question. Who are you talking to when you think?